So here we have one of the rather few pictures of Francis Schaeffer. It's surprising. He was really well known in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and still there are really few really good photos compared to how people are, the number of photographs of people today. Of course, there's a lot of photos of him, but very few that are really good photos, actually. What can we learn from Francis Schaeffer? Let me start by my personal story. I come from Sweden, the world's most secularized country. It's often sad. And I was born in the south of Sweden, which is the most secularized part of Sweden. I was born into a warm Christian family. So we prayed together, we studied the Bible together. My father was a lay preacher, so I grew up with the Christian faith and came to believe as a child in that environment. But I was not that old when I realized, wow, what a strange family I have come to. No one else seems to believe in this. We were part of a Christian fellowship, kind of the center of the city. Where I lived, I had no Christian friends. There were no Christian except me in my class. As far as I knew, no Christians on the school. I'm sure there were some, but no one showed their flags. So I felt as an absolute alien. What on earth is this that is so important within my family? And I think I've experienced things, but what is it? Why are the most of the people around me either thinking, this is totally irrelevant, totally uninteresting, or this is just stupid, this is just foolishness. So that became a real struggle for me coming up in my teenage years and in the process of what should I affirm from my background and what new direction should my life take when I'm starting to really do my own life. When I was 16 years old, in the beginning of the summer, I was at the Christian Youth Conference. On the last day, there was a book table, and they sold out all the books, extremely cheap. I found one book, 5 kronor, nothing in terms of money, but with a very fascinating title. It was called, or entitled, The God Who Is There. But in the Swedish edition, Den Gud som finns till. I didn't know anything about Schaeffer, but I was fascinated by the title. And since it was only 5 kronor, okay, I buy it. I went from the summer conference to our summer house and become reunited with my family. And we were going to stay there for the rest of the summer, many weeks. And the next day, Monday morning, I was supposed to start my summer work to earn some money. I woke up sick. And I was sick for the rest of the summer. I'd never been that before. And I was just locked into our summer house. No television, no internet. This was 1976. No books, because libraries and books were in our year-round house down in Lund. The only things that were there were Bibles and some old devotionals, and then that book. So I had nothing to do but try to read this new book I bought at the conference. I struggled with the first 100 pages because that's an overview of Western history, and there was a lot of things I did not understand of what Schaeffer would do. But I understood this much, that this author, he really believes that it is our culture that is foolish and Christianity is reasonable. And then from page 101 in the Swedish edition, it is a really powerful and strong explanation and argumentation for the Christian gospel. I read that book back and forth that summer. And God used it in my life to help me to embrace in a more personal and deeper way the faith I had from my background. And from that point on, Schaeffer and apologetics, because that was what he was doing, has had a major influence in my life and in my ministry. Some of you, I guess, know quite a lot about Francis and Edith Schaeffer. Others know nothing. a lot of the knowledge about him is disappearing today. A new generation have never heard about him. Here is Francis and Edith Schaeffer, a wonderful couple. Two Americans sent as missionaries to Europe, originally to work with children's work and youth work. But gradually they sensed the calling from God to do something different. Their own children, when they became teenagers, started to bring their non-Christian friends to their home. And it was obvious that Francis Schaeffer had a unique ability to speak about the Christian faith in a meaningful way to non-Christians. So they saw person after person come to faith in their own home. And Edith was a wonderful person in the way to create an open home, a warm atmosphere, helping people to feel loved. And out from that, the work of L'Abri grew. L'Abri is a French word. They lived in the mountains of Switzerland. L'Abri means, oh, my brain is stand still. Tillflykt in Swedish. Shelter, refuge. Thank you. Shelter, refuge. They wanted their home to be a shelter, refuge for people who wanted to search for answers for life's really big question. And gradually, the rumor about what's happening up in this little village in the Swiss Alps was spreading. People were coming from all over Europe. And other families joined them and opened their home in that village. Os Guinness worked for some time with Francis and Edith Schaeffer. And he says on Francis Schaeffer, I never met anyone with such a passion for God, combined with a passion for people, combined with a passion for truth. That is an extremely rare combination. And Schaeffer embodied it. And then he says about Edith, a great heart of love and such indomitable faith, tireless prayer, boundless energy, passionate love for life and beauty, irrepressible laughter, and seemingly limitless time for people. And the combination of those two was what made L'Abri really attractive. For the rest of this presentation, I will only talk about Francis Schaeffer, because we have limited time, but I really want to underline the importance of the two together for the work of L'Abri. I said that the rumors of the Schaeffer spread. This is in the 60s in the magazine Time, Mission to the Intellectuals. So even at secular newspapers, they heard the rumors about people start to travel to this unknown village up in the Alps, searching for God, searching for answers, taking Christianity seriously. And they describe what happened. Each weekend, the Schaeffers are overrun by a crowd of young men and women, mostly from the universities, painters, writers, actors, singers, dancers, beatniks, professing every shade of belief and disbelief. And they met in the home of Schaeffers. They worked practically together, they studied, and then they had extensive discussions around the dinner table. And those discussions could last for hours. And Schaeffer answering, connecting with people and answering their questions. Even though Schaeffer today is not that known as he was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's still true to say that Francis Schaeffer and C.S. Lewis are the two most influential apologists of the 20th century. And you see here is a book to underline it. This is really surprising. How on earth could a person like Schaeffer be as influential as Lewis? You think about it. Lewis, he worked out from prestigious university platforms in Oxford and Cambridge. He was a world-renowned author of fiction and children's book. He was a highly esteemed academic in literature. What a platform. Of course he had influence. An American missionary in a small village up in the Alps, how on earth could he have that huge influence? That's a good question. One of the answers would be this. Greg Pritchard, the leader here at ELF, who worked with Schaeffer for some time, he says one of the secrets here is that Schaeffer did not have an official platform at the university or in an organization, but his influence, Greg suggests, it's that a leader's personal influence on other leaders, while less understood or appreciated historically, can actually be an equally powerful legacy. So Schaeffer influenced numerous young Christian leaders who in turn influenced so many people, because Schaeffer invested a lot of time in individuals. Of course, in a huge number of people that did not become Christian leaders, but helped them to be rooted in their faith, or coming to faith and be rooted in their faith. But he also invested a lot of time in young Christian leaders who were influenced by him, and through them, huge numbers of people were influenced. What was it these leaders appreciated and learned from Schaeffer? And we then can ask the question, how much of that can we learn from? But let me highlight what I think they specifically learned from Schaeffer. There will be more. This is not an extensive list, and it's not in a kind of order of importance. I will just highlight a number of things that I think has been highly important and influential. Firstly, Schaeffer, though he was not an academic, he had an unusual mind in terms of seeing through what's actually happening. He made time transparent, connecting the dots in a really chaotic world. What is this that is happening, and why is it happening? And he had a unique, I think, gift in making time transparent for people, so they suddenly understood the chaos they were living in. He connected the dots. How could he do that? He listened carefully to culture. He was not an academic, but he listened really carefully to culture, to artists. What's happening in media, what's happening in the arts, what's happening in the young generation. And all his life he was in conversation with people. And he was perceptive to see and understand in what direction people were moving. And then he were able to tracing the roots of what's happening today. Why are the so-called Christian Europe, the historically Christian culture of Europe, why are now in that culture truth and meaning and beauty denied? How does that come? Why are Europeans denying truth and meaning and beauty? And he was also able to predict the future. If we continue along these lines, where will we end? Here's a more contemporary example. Maybe some of you have read Harari's book, Sapiens. Harari is an Israeli historian, an atheist, tracing the history of human beings. The book Sapiens, much of the content is in a summarized form in a YouTube presentation he did 10 years ago called Bananas in Heaven. It's worth listening to if you want to hear how contemporary intellectual are understanding our time. And in that presentation, you see, he says, human rights are just like heaven and like God. In what sense? Well, here is his reasoning. Human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we have invented and spread around because it gives us some survival value. That's the background. It may be a very nice story. It may be a very attractive story. You want to believe it, but it's just a story. It's not reality. It's not the biological reality. Take a human, cut him open, look inside. You find their blood, and you find their heart and lungs and kidneys, but you don't find their any rights. No, of course you don't find the rights inside the body. And since there is nothing more than the natural world, there couldn't be any rights. That follows logically from the rejection of God. So many naive Westerners have thought you can reject God, but you can retain belief in human rights and human dignity and right and wrong and so on. And Schaeffer was really sharp in analyzing this and showing, well, our culture has rejected God. It will lead to this. There will no longer be a foundation for anything of that which has built the Western civilization. And he said, interestingly, if we continue along this line, what will it lead to? In the early 80s, he was in a television program, and the program was titled, From Humanism to Chaos to Totalitarianism. And people said, oh, you're too pessimistic. And I would say, this was really prophetic. We are there now. You reject God and think that humans can be the basis. But that will lead to chaos, and we are in the midst of that chaos. And chaos and anarchy is the worst possible scenario. So then the idea of the strong man arises, the dictator, the totalitarian tendency. So I think he was really a prophet here, seeing what this will lead to. I never met Schaeffer. He died 84. Francis Schaeffer. I met Edith twice. She died a few years ago. I visited L'Abri in Switzerland a few years after Schaeffer died. And at that time, if you came as a guest and student to L'Abri, you had a tutor. You talked to one of the leaders there, and you explained what kind of issues and questions you want to study and discuss and so on, and they proposed a kind of first draft of a study program. And then you could read some articles or books, but mainly you listened to tapes, these kinds of old tape recorders, and those really cheap headphones. And I noticed one thing. Sitting in the library there, and a lot of people were listening, and because of those really lousy headphones, there was a lot of noise coming out. And I noticed here is one word repeated again and again and again, which is not a typical word in the church environment that I come from. And that word was reality. The people at L'Abri constantly talked about reality, the real world, how Christianity connects to, explains reality, and that we need to test the alternatives to Christianity in relationship to reality. The external world, that reality, and the internal reality of being a human being created in God's image, but separated from God through the fall, and now corrupted by sin. And I think that was for a lot of Christians coming from a kind of more pietistic background, where the Christian faith was related to the Bible, and of course it is, but when Christian faith was explained, it was explained in relationship to biblical texts and biblical formulations, and that is of course necessary, no critique of that, but it was not explained in relationship to the factual reality of this universe and of my human existence, of reality. And I think that's a really important contribution. Schaeffer saw very early on where our culture were moving, that because we have become humanists, putting man at the center, we will not hold on to objective truth. Since man is limited, small, no man knows everything, and therefore no one knows ultimate truth. And he saw already in the 60s a young generation becoming relativists. He saw the postmodern development before that word was coined. And to counter that, he coined the phrase true truth, because he noticed that people talked about truth, but they did not mean truth in an objective sense. They meant what they felt were true today. And of course, tomorrow they could have another feeling of what was true. So he talked about true truth. And he said, truth carries with it confrontation. Truth demands confrontation, loving confrontation, but confrontation nevertheless. And he said to Christians, we need to teach the Christian faith on the foundation of antithesis. Namely, you have a thesis and then you have the antithesis. So you put up a contrast in order to have clarity. True truth. Schaeffer was a generalist. In one sense, you can say there's a huge need for specialists, for academics, and they contribute enormously and very important things. But often a weakness with the specialists is that they are diving really deep into a small area and are sometimes lost in all the details, at least in relationship to us ordinary people. A generalist is someone who takes the big picture and puts together this big picture with knowledge from many different areas. I often take the illustration of a map. If one comes to London the first time and it just pops up out of the subway, it's just a chaotic situation of people and streets and strange buses. And what you need there to have an orientation is a map. What is a map? It is a generalization. Millions of details are not there. You don't want a map in the scale 1:1. It's really, it's a horrible thing to fold, you know. So you need a generalization to get the big picture, the basic structure of London and the underground, and then you can fill in all the details as you go by. And Schaeffer often worked as a generalist, given the big picture. And one of the maps you can see in Schaeffer's writing is this. He said, when you're dealing with the really ultimate questions of life, there are not many people left in the room. That was his way of saying the basic alternatives are actually rather few. Ultimately, if you ask the question, where does everything come from? You can only give two answers. Everything has its origin in something impersonal, or everything has its origin in something personal. No one has the luxury to begin with nothing. From nothing, nothing comes. And today, something is here. So, no one can start with nothing. This reality, this world, has its base either in something impersonal, like energy or matter, or in a person, in a mind, in a love. Under the impersonal, you will find two huge families of religions and philosophies. Western naturalism, who says, well, it is the universe itself that is eternal, and it is energy and matter. It's impersonal and material. And then you have the Eastern religions, like Hinduism and Buddhism and all the different versions. They would say, no. The origin is an impersonal but spiritual reality, like Brahma. There's no mind, no love, no will. It's spiritual but impersonal. And then you have the marvelous alternative of a person being the origin of the universe. If we take those on this side, Western naturalism, nature is the starting point, means there is no meaning to our existence. just energy and matter. If you take Eastern pantheism, they would say ultimate reality is a spiritual reality, but it's impersonal, and therefore you don't relate to a person, you don't pray. You have to look for techniques to come in sync with this impersonal reality. That's why silence is more important in Eastern religions than prayer, because there is no one to talk to, and there's no one who has revealed himself to us in language. The other fascinating alternative is that we come from someone personal. And notice there are no more alternatives. Something is either impersonal or it is a person. There is no third category. What would that be? So this is the ultimate choice, the ultimate dilemma. Does everything come from the impersonal or from a person? Under the heading of the personal, you have the Judeo-Christian theism, a personal, loving God. And here, the belief in a personal creator, here you have a revelation from God. He's a person, he speaks, he has revealed himself. The word is central, and we are called to respond to the word in prayer. Now, you can start to fill in details. So under Western naturalism, you have many different versions in terms of the details. You can describe it as humanism or existentialism or Marxism or behaviorism or different versions of postmodernism. They differ in a number of areas, but they all agree everything goes back to the impersonal, and it should be described in material terms or in terms of energy. You have Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, what we call New Age. Huge difference in terms of a lot of details, but they share the same basic assumption of an impersonal beginning, which is spiritual. And on the personal side, you have Judaism, the natural starting point, where we meet a personal God, the I am, not only existence, but personal existence, I am. Christianity, who affirms the Old Testament and says now it's fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And then you have to put Islam here, because it was inspired by the Judeo-Christian belief in God, but they have then changed it and actually moved it towards a more impersonal understanding of God, but it's still under that heading. I found this really helpful to try to start to sort amongst all the different alternatives. Schaeffer takes the illustration of a broken book. There he says this. So it is with Christianity. The illustration here is a book has been torn, so it is in two halves. Every side, every page is torn, so there you have the two halves. And then you have only access to one of the halves. That symbolizes this reality. And he says, so it is with Christianity. The ripped pages remaining in the book corresponds to the abnormal universe and the abnormal man we now have. The parts of the pages which are discovered, so suddenly you discovered the other half of the book. The parts of the pages which are discovered corresponds to the scriptures, which are God's propositional communication to mankind, which not only touches religious truth, but also touch the cosmos and history, which are open to verification. So you have one half book, but none of the pages are really meaningful because every sentence is cut off half. And if you take the Bible and put it together with reality, suddenly you can start to read the book because the Bible corresponds to fit together with reality, with this created order, with who we are as human beings. I think that's a powerful illustration. You take Islam or Hinduism or naturalism and try to combine that and make it into a meaningful text, so to say. It does not work. I think a lot of people who came in contact with Schaeffer really benefited to have this kind of thinking, to help them see through the chaos of ideas around us. Another famous expression from Schaeffer was taking off the roof. Taking off the roof. He writes this: every man has built a roof over his head to shield himself at the point of tension. So Schaeffer thinks that a non-Christian who is thinking out from a non-Christian perspective, let's say an atheist, there will be a tension between reality as it is and the consequences of this system of ideas that the person have accepted. But in order to avoid the contradictions here, people build a roof over their head to shelter themselves, so the contradiction of what they believe in relationship to how reality is not felt. And he said in evangelism, a key thing today is to lift off the roof so reality actually hits home to people. Every man has built a roof over his head to shield himself at the point of tension between reality and his non-Christian view. The Christian lovingly must remove the shelter and allow the truth of the external world and of what man is to beat him up. When the roof is off, each man must stand naked and wounded before the truth of what is. He must come to know that his roof is a false protection from the storm of what is. So people think there is no God, but human beings are valuable. They have a roof protecting them from the horrible idea that human life is meaningless and human beings are worthless. And we need to take away that roof so the truth of their view is hitting home. Schaeffer was known for empathy, for compassion. And that's why one of the things that made him so successful in relating to people, he had real love for people. He cried with people. So when he talked about lifting off the roof, he also said, I need to remind myself constantly that this is not a game I'm playing. If I begin to enjoy it as a kind of intellectual exercise, then I'm cruel and can't expect no real spiritual result. As I push the man off his false balance, taking off the roof, he must be able to feel that I care for him. Otherwise, I will only end up destroying him, and the cruelty and ugliness of it all will destroy me as well. So there was a strong combination of truth and love and truth in Schaeffer's ministry. One of his most important books is called He's There and He's Not Silent. And actually, for the first time, it's been translated into Swedish. It was released just recently. So I'm really happy that we have his three most basic books in Swedish. The God Who's There, now in a new, fresh Swedish translation, Escape from Reason, and He's There and He's Not Silent. That's a short but really important book where Schaeffer talks about necessity in different areas. And you can say the main point in that book is to challenge people to not be intellectual cheaters. If you have one starting point, you need to draw the logical conclusion to its end. If you don't like what you find at the end of the logical conclusion from your starting point, you cannot change line at the middle of the line. You need to go back to the starting point, change your starting point, and take another starting point that gives you other consequences, which are possible to live according to. So one way of summarizing that book is to say that our culture has started to say there is no God, it's an impersonal beginning. But then we are faced with a dark choice between nihilism, forced to say there's no meaning to anything. There's no truth, there's no beauty, there's no hope. Life is just darkness. Very few people can live like that and take that seriously. Then the other alternative is to say, I don't care about logic. I don't care about rationality. And people become existentialists, like in the 60s, and now they become postmodern. So they start to believe things which they have no foundation for. They cannot ground their beliefs in anything. Schaeffer's attitude to the Christian faith was not that we can prove the Christian faith. That is a naive view on knowledge. But his attitude was that we must give honest answers to honest questions. You can talk about the Christian faith, and there are good and sufficient reasons. There are no proofs, because you cannot prove things metaphysically or historically in an absolute sense, but there are good and sufficient reasons to believe in the Creator God, to believe in the revelation of God in Jesus Christ, to believe in the revelation in the Bible. And Schaeffer was really good in coining meaningful phrases like, there are good and sufficient reasons. A catchphrase, good and sufficient reasons. What does that mean for a person to become a Christian? That you cannot prove it, but there are good and sufficient reasons. Schaeffer, at a number of points, were in opposition to how Kierkegaard was used in many Christian circles. And in his later writing, he is clear that maybe that was not Kierkegaard's intention, but Kierkegaard was used that way in many Christian circles. That to become a Christian is to take a leap of faith, often presented as a blind leap of faith, that you just jump without knowing if there is someone to catch you. And Schaeffer said, no, that's not the Christian faith, a blind leap of faith. You can take a step of faith out from good and sufficient reasons. And you see here is an article that discusses that. Kierkegaard's leap or Schaeffer's step, a step of faith, where you first are invited to investigate the message and the reasons for the message before you take a step of faith. I found an interesting book called A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Vannakan. I don't know how his name is pronounced. He was a close friend to C.S. Lewis. He was a non-Christian. He had a lot of conversations with and correspondence with C.S. Lewis. And he was gradually drawn closer to the Christian faith. And finally he was confronted with Jesus Christ and the need of taking a stand on Jesus, for or against, reject him or accept him. And he writes in this book, A Severe Mercy, about this and a thing that he realized. Namely, there is a gap between the probable and the proved. So you cannot prove those things in an absolute sense. You can only go with the probable. How was I to cross this if I cannot prove it? Why should I take a step? If I were to stake my whole life on the risen Christ, I wanted proof, I wanted certainty, I wanted to see him, eat a bit of fish, I wanted letters of fire across the sky. I got none of these, and I continued to hang about on the edge of the gap. It was a question of whether I was to accept him or reject. And here comes his discovery. My God! There was a gap behind me too. Perhaps the leap to acceptance was a horrible gamble, but what of the leap to rejection? There might be no certainty that Christ was God, but by God there was no certainty that he was not. That's a really good point. Everyone has to take a step of faith. For or against God, for or against Christ. No one can prove it. You have to take a step in faith. And then the question is, if there is a gap behind me as well as in front of me, then the question of, are there good and sufficient reasons for me to take this step forward towards Christ compared to the reasons for taking a step in the other direction to reject Christ. Schaeffer worked individually with persons, and he loved to have conversations. He writes this: we tend to give a person pre-packed answers instead of having the compassion of Christ, which is to take the person where they are and actually step into their world in order to talk in a meaningful way. When we have those conversations with people and someone is drawn close to God, I think this passage from The God Who Is There is a very helpful one. Schaeffer says that to become a Christian, to take the step of faith, that means that you have to bow twice. A human being needs to bow twice in order to become a Christian. A man is faced with God's promises. Christian faith means bowing twice. First, he needs to bow in the realm of being, metaphysically. That is, to acknowledge that he is a creature before the infinite personal creator who is there. Second, he needs to bow in the realm of morals. That is, to acknowledge that he has sinned and therefore that he has true guilt before the God who is there. If he has true moral guilt before an infinite God, he has the problem that he, as finite, has no way to remove such a guilt. Thus, what he needs is a non-humanist solution. Now he's faced with God's propositional promise, believe in the Lord Jesus, and thou shalt be saved. This is really to the point today. To become a Christian, you need to bow twice. First, to accept you yourself are not God. There is a God who is your creator and who is above you and has authority over you. And secondly, you need to bow morally and acknowledge that you are a sinner who cannot save yourself.